I'd like to call the Educator Effectiveness Committee to order, please. May I have a roll call?
Dr. Beebe? Dr. Beebe is absent. Ms. Popey?
Present.
Ms. Popey is present. Ms. Bradford? Ms. Bradford is absent. Mr. Garvey? Ms. Bradford is present. Mr. Garvey? Mr. Garvey is absent. Mr. Gio? Mr. Gio is absent. Ms. Hill?
Present.
Ms. Hill is present. Mr. Lee?
Here.
Mr. Lee is present. Dr. Maranti?
Here.
Dr. Maranti is present. Ms. Orange Jones? Ms. Orange Jones is absent. Mr. Romer?
Here.
Mr. Romer is present. Mr. Wagesback? Mr. Wagesback is absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you. What's our first item on the agenda?
The consent agenda is ready for approval, and we are adding items 5.1 and 5.2.
I'll move approval.
Can I have a motion?
I'll move approval of the consent agenda.
Is there a second? I have a motion and a second. Ms. Bradford seconds the motion. What's the next item on the agenda?
The next item
Alma,
is,
do we vote?
Oh, is there any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you.
I like the way you work.
the next item is item 3.1, consideration of approval of a certificate-only alternate teacher preparation program at Loyola University in conjunction with an approved program at Our Lady of Holy Cross College. The recommendation is to approve.
I'll move approval.
I hear a motion from Dr. Moranti and a second from Mr. Lee. Would the department like to discuss this item?
No, I would just say, members, this is a music certification program at a really nationally renowned music school at Loyola.
Is there any objection? Do I have any public comment on this one? Hearing no objection, motion carries. What's our next item on the agenda?
On page 6, item 4.1, consideration of presentation regarding local implementation of Compass. The recommendation is to receive.
Is there a motion?
Also move.
We have a motion by Mr. Gio. Is there a second? Thank you, Ms. Bradford. Superintendent?
Thank you, Ms. Bopey. Members, we wanted, in the spirit of the most recent presentation about academic standards, to talk through Compass and to give you an update on where we are as a state and where our school districts and charter schools are in this process, and just to really give a sense of where this is all going and to ask your support of the general direction for where Compass is going. So we have a 3-slide presentation that we would like to walk through, and we have a general direction that we would like to ask your support of going forward. This would imply policy changes in the next 6 to 12 months from the board, and I would ask your consideration of it. Let me just talk through the general timeline for where we are today. In this session 2010, you see on the left-hand side of this first slide, Act 54 was passed. That was over 3 years ago. That is the law that creates the Compass system. In the 2010-11 year, a committee of educators, policymakers, union officials, business people was formed to create the regulations that BESE then passed. So in other words, you have passed rules, and the previous BESE board incarnation has passed rules to say this is how ratings are to be done in the Compass system. In 2011 and 12, that was piloted in 10 districts and charter organizations. The value-added model that the legislature has required was piloted And Act 1 was passed as well to tie consequences to the Compass system. In 2012, districts either implemented Compass or TAP. I think that's an important thing to note, by the way, just to call out, if you don't mind, Mr. Lee, by way of example. DeSoto Parish uses the TAP system as instead of Compass. The same is true in many schools in Ascension near here. So districts can choose which system they use. Most have used Compass. We made changes at this level, the board did, to give districts greater flexibility in January. And ultimately, we are now in the middle of the final stages of the first year, so we're ending the first year of Compass's implementation. We're going to provide to districts some value-added data so they can make evaluation decisions using those data. Districts will be providing to the state their final ratings for their employees by July 29th. And in September, we will provide to the public and to the media and to you a final report on the ratings from one district to the next. So we've got about 2 months left in this process until the end of that cycle, the end of the ratings. There is an update here in terms of, just for your clarification, on policies that result as a consequence of rating decisions this year. I know that's been much talked about. I don't want to walk through them in great depth, but there are updates on educator compensation, on hiring, on intensive assistance for educators or dismissal, for reduction in force, and for tenure decisions. I'm not going to walk through this in detail orally, but I'm happy to answer questions. We wanted just to provide this as a public document so the public is clear on the specific policies. As we wrap this up, just be assured we're giving information to districts. They're making these decisions. This is really going on at a school and a district level, and we will report back to the public in September with a final tally of all of the ratings broken out by district so we can see with transparency how those ratings were done. Members, what I would like your consideration of is the third slide today. And we're doing this again, as we did with the first presentation, to forecast policy decisions that will be put in front of the board over the course of the next 6 to 12 months. There are 3 categories in which we are going to be asking your consideration. 1, to date, every Compass rating is made by a local administrator. It's made by a principal. It's made by another official at the school level. This board and we and our administration have worked together to create policies that put power and decision-making authority in the hands of people who are closest to the kids, and that policy is in line with it. In January, you acted to make most of the teachers covered by value-added data have their ratings also made by local principals, not made by Baton Rouge. However, according to the regulations today, teachers that are in the lowest echelon of value-added ratings still have their evaluation determined by those data. That's the bottom 10%. In light of other things that I'll say in this presentation, we're going to ask your support over time, not immediately, but over the next year to 2 years, to move toward a time when ratings are exclusively made by local administrators. Using data, whether it's student learning targets, whether it's value-added data, whether it's the observations, as a source of information, but where it's principals and other administrators making those decisions, not solely determined by one data point. 2, we're going to continue to work with districts and teachers on ensuring that Compass is a true professional development tool. We recently trained 2,000 teachers again at our Teacher Leaders Summit on teacher collaboration and feedback work. We're using our video library, which now has 30 videos and will soon have more, of exemplary practice and other levels of practice across the Compass rubric to make this a professional development tool. We're training principals and assistant principals across the state again this summer. Finally, item 3 is if we move to a time when decisions are made by local administrators, the public and the administrators and our educators and parents should have the confidence that those decisions are made on an equal basis, on a level playing field, with appropriate rigor no matter where you live. At the creation of Act 54, there was a very good, positive concern that the ratings be as fair and equal across localities. The reason that we have kept in some of these stiffer measures around using data to make evaluations is so as to ensure that level of consistency and rigor. As we gradually transition toward local administrators making these decisions using the data but not mandated by the data, we need to have a means of ensuring that there is transparency and that there is equal rigor across the state. And I will tell you right now, in the first year of implementation, we have a lot of districts that are keeping with very high levels of rigor. I think you'll be very favorably pleased when you see the reports coming out in September. And then we have some whose standards are clearly probably more relaxed than is appropriate. We will ask your support, therefore, of a policy that doesn't just give local authority, but also guarantees the public accountability for rigor. That's been consistent with the framework that this board has promulgated generally, and that's what we will ask your support of in the 6 to 12 months to come. This is not an immediate change. This is a gradual change. Slowly we are giving authority to administrators to make these decisions using data, but we're doing it in a way that it also tries to ensure transparency and rigor as we get there. Happy to talk in greater detail about this with you, but wanted to share this report with you for your questions and comments. Thank you, members.
We have some public comment cards. Do members have any comments that they'd like to make at this time? Mr. Romer?
I don't mind the public comments first, but I do want to speak on the topic, however you want to go.
You can
I
start.
will speak now, since given me the opportunity. I appreciate the presentation, and I will remind members of what we said earlier today. Two things. One is I appreciate, again, the superintendent bringing to us a framework to consider on major issues that we're going to make decisions on over the next year. Again, to go to Ms. Barrios' comment earlier, an attempt to tee issues up, for lack of a better phrase, publicly prior to final decisions being made. And this is another attempt to do that. So I'm pleased that the superintendent brought it to this board and to this meeting for our consideration. I also will emphasize something that we need to consider. Again, we're not making policy decisions today, but there is a framework here that we're trying to establish, in my opinion, which is how do you combine the idea of autonomy with accountability? And it's a struggle, which is I don't believe, and this is my opinion, that the State Board of Education ought to be running public schools. That's not what our task is. Our task is to set standards and hold people accountable for outcomes that allow districts and principals freedom, more freedom on how they get there. So this will be an interesting conversation that we have over the next 6 to 12 months, which is how do we combine the idea of rigor and high standards with freedom for locals to make decisions. And it's an important discussion for us to have. It does slightly change the framework of our current policy, but it's something we ought to consider, in my opinion, and I appreciate the superintendent bringing it forth.
Mr. Garvey and then Mr. Lee.
Yes, I have a question for the superintendent, and maybe the timing on this is not right. You've laid out some general proposals or general thoughts, and I was hoping to get some more specifics, particularly regarding the teacher observations that the principals or their designees do twice a year, I think is how many we require. In St. Tammany, there have been some principals that have asked for more leeway, and I'm wondering just how much more leeway are you picturing with this proposal for this coming year?
Well, I think let's first of all, I will be more specific, and I appreciate the opportunity to be so. I think we should distinguish between the day-to-day workings of Compass and the ratings. On the day-to-day workings, not by way of BESE. This is not a BESE policy issue. It's a department practice issue. I think that the practices so far have been too boxy. So it's two observations, a formal and an informal. Whereas, those of you who have worked in schools know that a good school operates very organically and informally. Principals are constantly in teachers' classrooms giving feedback. Should be. So we shouldn't limit principals' access to classrooms or, because of our boxy policies. So we plan to, and I should have mentioned this under the second item, professional development, to offer principals greater flexibility to be in classrooms. That's the same, by the way, on the rubric. I had a group of teachers from Lafayette High School come up to me recently and say, hey, we want a choice in the rubric. And actually, districts have a choice in the rubric. Districts should also be able to choose their observation schedules. They should be able to say, look, in this school, principals are going to be in more classrooms more regularly, observing, giving feedback more regularly. So we think we need to give that flexibility immediately. That's a department practice question. In the longer term, this gets at Mr. Romer's question, is the rating part. And I think the rating is a different question of flexibility. And the reason is that that's more a question of the what, of the standards that we're seeking to achieve in all schools. And right now, districts have very broad latitude with all teachers other than with those teachers who are in the bottom 10% on the data dimension. Today, that in terms of getting to the final rating, that 10% is definitive. And I think you don't want a principal to not have that voice. You want the principal to have the voice. On the other hand, BESE's policy has been to keep with that 10% so as to ensure that there is a minimum standard of rigor. And I think that we will want to bring to you a framework where on one hand, yes, principals have the latitude over all rating decisions. But on the other hand, there are guideposts to ensure that there is appropriate levels of rigor. We do not have evidence today that every single district would use that freedom appropriately. On the other hand, we don't want to inhibit principals who would use it appropriately, or superintendents. And that's the balance that we're walking.
Okay, let me ask, I guess as an example. In St. Tammany, I think the one principal that I talked to would rather do 4 visits with a teacher for half as much time as what we require in our 2 visits a year. Is that something you're thinking would be approved or
yes.
Okay?
We will be asking, and again, this is not a regulations issue or a BESE policy issue. This is just a department practice issue. We will be asking districts to work with their network leaders on what rubric you're going to use, and second, what's going to be your practice regarding observation. And, for example, we're encouraging regular walkthroughs of schools by administrators. It's silly to say we're encouraging regular walkthroughs, but at the same time, we're only encouraging 2 observations per year. Principals should be free to do these things organically, and we're asking districts to design the plan as best is fit for their schools.
And when they design it, they would submit it to the department for
Yes.
approval?
They'd work with their network leaders on it, and that would be their plan, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Lee?
The difficulty is having expectation and accountability that's transparent and statewide, and yet permitting flexibility at the local level. That is difficult. And I agree that the board's responsibility is to set the policies, and then for the superintendent to set the expectation and ensure that we do have some consistency. It really highlights the need for leadership training and effective leadership at the local level, particularly at the school level. But the same is true at the school system level. So I know you know that. I know you're looking at all that. It's a difficult task, and it takes time. takes time to implement effectively. But I think we are moving in the right direction. We're ready to move in the right direction, and I appreciate that.
We'll now go to public comment. We'll have Steve Monahan representing the Louisiana Federation of Teachers first. Then we'll have Wayne Free representing the Louisiana Association of Educators, followed by Ms. Barrios. I'll remind you that the comments are limited to 3 minutes per person.
Thank you, Ms. Boffey, members of the committee. My name's Steve Monahan. I'm president of the Louisiana Federation of Teachers, and I can do 3 minutes. But I will say you all produced a lot of paper, great deal of paper. It takes a lot of reading to get through this all last night. A couple of points. I do appreciate the fact that we are being presented with a 10,000-foot kind of version of the direction we're going to go. The idea of making the evaluation process, I hope what we all want, a fair, accurate evaluation that truly infuses instruction. I mean, that's the bottom line of what I think where we all start. A couple of comments, though, I think I have to make. I happen to have the advantage of having lived the history of the years that are put on the table of and actually being part of the process that discussed how this would evolve. And I noted in the presentation, for the first time in a while, I heard the liberal use of the word organic. That's where the conversation, Superintendent White, actually started when we were discussing Race to the Top in the application, that this was going to be an organic process. But the context of that organic development was that it was outside of a statutorily required and high-stakes version of the process. We were going to kind of get it right through the experimentation phase, and then we were going to, if indeed it needed to be tweaked, it would be tweaked, and it would be, and then rolled out for prime time. That was the expression also I remember at the table. Specifically now, though, I think everyone has to be aware. It's just the fact of life. We are tweaking this. How we're tweaking it, I think we'll see as it comes along. There's been not much in the media about changes that may come. Again, I got to back up to 2009, 2010, the statute, and all the rest of this. It was in the context, again, it was in the context that nothing would really happen that would be hurtful to either students or losing a teacher or the teachers themselves as a result of something that had to be built. But now it seems like it is in the air, and the airplane's in flight. It carries passengers, and it's still being worked on, and there is still a great deal of uncertainty. Specific to the 3 minutes, within the 3-minute context, I noted that even in the overview, I think it's important that we're all saying the same thing, or at least understand what the law says. I think on one of the pieces dealing with reductions in force, the law says that experience and seniority shall not be used as a primary criterion for decision making. It doesn't say it shall not be used. So this causes the phones to ring when we all try to interpret what the policy really does say. And it doesn't say that. So I think it ought to say what it says. And policies were adopted last year to deal with this. Now, decisions...
Mr. Monahan, are you getting close?
I'm wrapping up.
Okay, thank you.
I only have 2 sentences.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So, you know how that disrupts the flow of your thought.
I know. I hate to do it. I try to do this to let you know.
And I was going. It's a much longer conversation, and I don't want to be as the president of the board said, that I see omen of some real problems to come, but I don't see harbinger of a smooth year, because there are going to be serious questions about how this is being implemented as it currently affects compensation and every other aspect of a teacher's life. So hopefully it's tweaked, it's done right, and I would really like, my final word, Ms. Boffey, every board member, as well as every stakeholder in process, should see maybe a video of how this works at the school level. How does Compass work? How does it work from whether it's an iPad or it's a computer program or whatever, and how we scoring these teachers, and whether or not you all believe that's indeed a successful or a duplicatable evaluation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Monahan. Mr. Free?
Wayne Free, Louisiana Association of Educators. I agree with everything I see on that screen. Local ownership ought to be a part of it. Too bad we didn't do it 2 years ago. It should be focused on professional development. There should be transparency in the process. The problem is we're not dealing with the underlying weakness of the Compass system. Let me say that again. The problem is we're not dealing with the underlying weakness of the Compass system. All we're doing is saying, y'all go out there and implement it however you want, and when you fail, then we have somebody to blame, rather than accept the blame here as it really belongs. If you truly want to look at building Compass in a way that's effective, then let me recommend that you put together a committee. 2 people selected by the superintendents, by the school boards, by the principals, by each of the teacher organization, and people selected by you, and develop an effective system, rather than implementing a system that is broken at its base and then blaming the schools because they didn't implement it appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Barrios. Mr. Richard, if you'll come up, you'll be next.
Lee Barrios, retired teacher from St. Tammany. Doggone it, Mr. Romer. You are spoiling things. This is the second time in an hour that you and I have agreed on something. There is a trust issue here. Our perspectives are different. You need to know that you can trust teachers, for God's sake, and principals to do the right thing with these evaluations. Teachers and principals and parents, I'll just say it, there is no trust for the Department of Ed and BESE anymore when it comes to this teacher evaluation system. So yes, we do have a problem and we need to work on that. You used an analogy, a golfing analogy in your commentary, and the term teeing up. There's another golfing analogy I'd like to use, and that's the use of the term for. When there's a ball coming at you and you're about to be hurt, you yell it for. And we've been yelling for teachers for quite a long time. And the fear is the ball coming at them is these value-added scores, and you're on the horizon part, Superintendent White, where value-added scores are released, final ratings submitted, the Compass report released. You promised, Superintendent White, and when you promised it, we knew it was impossible. The teacher evaluation scores would not be public scores. Well, it's no different, a score or the final outcome for a teacher. There's no way to prevent teachers' evaluations being public. Parents are going to want to know. That's the whole purpose. We even had a legislator, bless his heart, who withdrew his bill that would allow parents who had a teacher who got a teacher who had been received an ineffective rating from choosing another teacher, which sets up a whole other realm of chaos. But there are definitely some problems. None of these steps in the timeline that you outlined was enacted, pre-researched, pre-tested. None of these parts was completed. And none of these has been this tweaking. What happens to the teachers that fall by the wayside as things get tweaked? Are we going to go back and give them a second chance? There are huge problems. I agree with Mr. Free. We need to basically stop at this point, and we tried to do it with the legislature. It didn't work. To put a hold on this, you talk about not rushing things, and yet you're rushing it, Superintendent White. I hope that this doesn't end up with a solution through the courts, but it looks like that's going to happen. Thank you.
Mr. Richard?
Good morning, Ms. Bofi and board members, Superintendent White. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today on this important issue. Representing school boards across the state, we feel it's very important that for the sake of clarity in this presentation, that we point out that the one-time $69 million allocation as a result of this most recent legislative session will not be based on performance for the 13-14 school year, and those dollars will be allowed for teacher raises, or school boards will be allowed some flexibility on how to spend those dollars. And that one-time allocation for the 50% certificated pay increase will not be based on performance. And we want to make sure that that doesn't get confused in any presentations or any policy decisions that go forward from this point on. The other thing we'd like to reiterate is the fact that what was said earlier, that seniority can be used, but not as a primary criterion based on legal interpretations. And we hope that we can reach some common ground on that issue down the road and not have to settle those issues as many things have been settled previously in the court of law. And I think one of the common themes of the legislative session that just ended was better communication, more stakeholder input, sincere stakeholder input from all of the various groups. And we would sincerely and respectfully request that we enter into a new time with BESE, with you all, and the state superintendent, to sincerely extend the olive branch and work together on these issues with sincere stakeholder input. And there's some items on the agenda further down the line today that there appears to be an effort to stifle that spirit of cooperation that we were so energized about as school board members and stakeholders, and we'll address those issues when we get to them. But we do want to work more closely with the department and Superintendent White to address some of the issues that Mr. Lee said earlier. School board members need to understand and have a better grasp of these ever-changing policies that change very frequently. And with that, I'll stop and thank you for the time this morning. Thank you.
Mr. Lee?
Do we have a motion on the floor?
We sure do, but I asked the superintendent to address a comment first.
Just briefly, members, you I believe, have been receiving letters about one of the issues Mr. Richard mentioned. The legislature included a one-time allocation of $69 million, give or take, which is meant to approximate a 2.75% raise. They included increase in the MFP. It's not in the MFP formula, but it's meant to act as such. So we are going to distribute those dollars to schools as part of the monies that we send to them every year. They included an instruction that 50% of that be included as a pay raise. That is what it said. And we are going to be telling districts, therefore, that it's a one-time funding. The governor is committed to it being in the executive budget for next year. There's some support for that, obviously, in the legislature. But we will not be dictating how it is that a district is to give its pay raise. There are stipends, there are base building salary increases, there are different factors in those things. It would be crazy for us across 70 different districts to try to say this is exactly how you should do it. We'll be giving them flexibility on it as Mr. Richard requested, but it is a one-time allocation for a pay raise.
Mr. Lee, the motion on the floor is to receive this item.
I would move to amend the motion to receive and approve the direction that this report indicates. Do you have a problem with that? No,
I'll second that.
So we have a, did you guys get that? And we have a second by Mr. Romer.
And I'd like to make a few more comments.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Romer.
I think to receive and approve is the right thing to do. One, it tells the superintendent we generally like the direction that he's outlined here. Obviously, the specifics need to be filled in, and we may or may not agree with those specifics, but we want to encourage him to continue down this path. I will make a couple comments regarding some of the testimony before us today. Part of this effort has come about because members and I have been traveling the state visiting schools and districts across the state. It's one of the things that I decided as a board that we should do more of. and then we don't do enough of that. And you find a wide variety of comments regarding Compass and the regulations that BESE has provided. I've been in districts where they don't like the guidelines because they say they're too restrictive, that in fact they would like to be more aggressive on their practices on teacher quality. And I find the opposite of that as well. So, part of this discussion has come about because of our effort to understand how it is being implemented and the impact it's having in classrooms and to our students. I also would respectfully disagree with the premise that the Compass instrument somehow is fatally flawed from the beginning. That's actually not the feedback I've received from a number of educators that say there's a great deal of Compass that has provided them a great deal of improvement in the classroom and normal classroom practices. So I actually don't view this as a tweak because it's flawed. I view this as potential change in the policy because we're trying to marry two concepts that need to be achieved in this state, which is empowering principals, empowering people in school buildings to make decisions, and yet keep standards of accountability high. And it is a very difficult balance to achieve. So I wouldn't characterize this as a tweak at all. I would characterize this as, can we improve it and ultimately get our state where we want it to be, where locals and where principals and where teachers feel empowered, where they're getting the proper training, and yet we have agreed to a set of goals, which the goals should be academic success for our students. And can we marry those two concepts? And so I appreciate the superintendent's presentation. I do appreciate the comments from the speakers today, and I support Mr. Lee's motion. Thank you.
I have Ms. Bradford and then Ms. Hill.
I'd like to offer a substitute motion, which I think is going to accomplish the same thing. I move the board would support the department's direction regarding a gradual shift toward greater decision-making authority by local administrators over the final Compass rating for educators, providing that the department also ensure that any proposal includes a commitment to accountability and rigorous decision-making on the part of all administrators.
Is there a second for Ms. Bradford's motion? I have a second by Mr. Garvey.
And I have a comment. It probably shocks everybody.
Mr. Romer?
I'm sorry. I'm going to stop talking at some point today.
You just have to be concise.
I will. I also want to remind people how we got where we are, which was a former system that basically just said teachers were either satisfactory or unsatisfactory, and 99.5% of our teachers received a satisfactory rating. So, there was a need and shift in policy, and that's how we ended up where we were today, which was the formal policy was not working by almost anybody's estimation. So, just a reminder of how we did get to where we are today, and now our effort is to make it exactly take the shape that we would want it to take.
Thank you, Mr. Romer. Ms. Hill?
Well, I would have to say that I'm not in favor in the motion. And I hear, Mr. Romer, you said that you visit various districts within the states. However, I have gone to several districts, some districts that are A districts and some districts that are failing. And the teachers, the educators are saying the same exact thing. We're moving too fast. And it's not that they don't want to be empowered. It's not that they don't want to be held accountable. But some of them just don't understand. They still don't have any clarity of what Compass is. And we're continuing trying to move forward. And not only that, even with the rubric, they still don't understand that, even with the toolboxes. So I think that we as a board, we are held accountable to make sure and assure the community, meaning the educators, that they're clear on what we're trying to implement. And so I'm not in favor. I'm going to be against the motions, so you can put that down for me. But I think that we are responsible, and we need to make sure that whenever we are implementing policies, that the community that we serve, which is the educators, that they are clear on what their expectations are, and to say that throughout this entire state, if you go into districts, and I don't know what districts you're going into, Mr. Romer, but the ones I'm going in, they are frustrated, they are angry, and they feel that we're not listening to them, that we're being disrespectful towards them, and that they have not been able to come to the table and give their opinions and what they think is best for the community and the children that they're serving. And so that's all I have to say.
So is your, is it? I'm gonna say something. So is your position that we ought not consider improvements? Is that your
I
position?
think that we can receive it, but to go ahead and improve it, I don't think so.
We just approved an outline of what issues we want to consider. You don't think we should consider improvements to Compass? Is that your position?
Yes, my position is,
Okay, great.
that's it, that's
clear.
my
I
position.
appreciate it.
Mr. Guillo?
Could you repeat the motion, please?
Yes, and I would, Ms. Bradford, when you repeat it, I would like for you to also add to receive the report.
Sure.
Receive and then you can make that motion.
I move that the board receive and support the department's direction regarding a gradual shift towards greater decision-making authority by local administrators over the final Compass rating for educators, provided that the department also ensure that any proposal includes a commitment to accountability and rigorous decision-making on the part of all administrators.
Wait a minute.
Mr. Lee?
I don't have a problem with that substitute motion. I just don't see how it differs from the first substitute.
I'll let you and Ms. Bradford work that out later.
No.
Is there any other board members have any comments to make? Okay, I know that Ms. Hill is opposed to the motion. Are there any others who are opposed to the motion? Hearing no more, motion carries. What's our next item?
The next item is on page 42, item 5.3, consideration of a records review regarding the issuance of a Louisiana teaching certificate appropriate to the credentials of Mr. Roddy Chason. The board will recommend to grant or deny.
I need a motion. Is the individual present? Okay. Will you come up to the table, please? Am I allowed to let the board members engage in questions before a motion is determined, Ms. Davis? Thank you. Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chasson.
Good morning.
I'll give you a few minutes to talk to us, and then if board members have specific questions, then I'll have you answer their questions.
It's been a long haul. I've had a big hurdle in my life back in 2008 that I made a poor decision, along with an accident physically. But the blessing from that was having the ability to go back home and help my father with my mom, who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's at the time, to help him.
I'm sorry, we're having difficulty hearing.
I'm sorry. To help my father care with her mom after I got in some trouble, made a bad decision. I made restitution for that. I've completed everything I needed to do for that decision. I was talking about the blessing that came out of the decision, giving me the ability to move back to help my father out with my mother, as she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and had to have a feeding tube installed, and my father wasn't able to do it. So the blessing from that was to have the ability to do that. Also, making the restitution for the decision that I made that got me in a bad situation at that time. I learned a lot from it. Another thing, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer recently. Finished my radiation. Brought a whole different outlook and perspective on my life. As my resume reflects from the years of coaching and teaching, it's an impeccable one. I've been blessed, not only with the ability to work with some good administrators and teachers, but also some good student athletes, and not just the regular student. One of my certifications is also in special education. And my favorite memories and rewards from the special education area was to see that student when I would get him on day one, or her on day one, just have the ability to pick up a fork when they couldn't do it day one by the end of the year, and help assist feeding that child. That, to me, meant just as much, and still today means just as much to me as coaching Glenn Dorsey and getting him assistance to get to LSU and then to the NFL. My heart belongs in education. I love helping kids, always have. All my children have excelled. All my kids, all my students have excelled. Are they all the same? No. Everyone is different. I welcome any principal, any teacher, any board member into any of my classroom settings in whatever school I've been at.
The question that I have for you, and you have a number of positive recommendations here from a wide range of individuals. The question for me that I wasn't able to determine based on reading these is whether or not the individuals knew about the poor decisions that you had made.
Yes, ma'am.
So the individuals who wrote these letters knew that you had you'd had great experiences, you made poor decisions, and now you're trying to get back on track.
That's
Thank
correct.
you.
Yes,
I appreciate that. Board members, are there other questions? Mr. Dio?
Just quickly, was there a rehabilitation process?
Yes, sir.
And what is the status of that? Is it?
It's finished.
You're finished?
Yes, I sent all the paperwork in to Ms. Davis. She has all that.
Do any of our other board members have questions for Mr. Chasson? No, ma'am, there's not.
A second.
So I have a motion to grant, and I have a second from Mr. Gio. Mr. Garvey?
Yes, we have a question for staff. Ms. Davis, can you tell us what was the infraction? What started this?
He pled guilty to access device fraud in 2009, which was under $500, and then in 2010 he also had the same charge, but was over $500.
Same charge from the same incident or a separate incident?
Separate incidents.
Okay. Can you tell us some more about what access device fraud is?
Yeah, let me get to that. I'm not going to be the lawyer. You can go ahead and explain.
Yes. It was an incident where I took in a roommate after my accident. Almost lost my arm. And the roommate was under, well, the lease of the apartment was under my name. And the fraud was done by theft on the roommate's part. And it was, the items were in my apartment. And I took the lick. I made restitution for it.
What items, what is
She would take anything from my medications to a purse from the next door neighbor who I lived by for 3 years.
And how does that get described as access device fraud?
I'm not really sure on the law on how that goes. I know that she used the woman's credit card and tried to write checks and different things of that nature.
Okay, that sounds more like what I have heard.
Yes, sir.
And she did the exact same thing that you did in 2009?
No, sir. Both of the incidences were done by her. It was my girlfriend at the time. And,
He pled guilty to the offense.
and
Both cases.
And did she get charged with
Yes.
this also?
yes,
And did she plead guilty?
yes, but I don't know where she is now. We've cut ties, and I haven't talked to her since the arrest, since 2010, and thank God.
But it happened in 2012.
No, 2009.
9 and 10.
What happened in 2012?
Nothing. I finished.
I don't have anything as well.
I finished.
What we have in our packet,
I completed restitution
What's that?
and rehabilitation for that.
okay,
Mom,
when there was the guilty plea in 2009, was there a revocation action started then?
Well, we don't always find out about the felony convictions until the individual goes to apply for a job in the district.
right.
And then he gets flagged, comes to the department, and we pull his license, which we did back in August of 2012. So we revoked his, the board revoked his license in 12 because he
Right.
applied for a job, a position.
I
And
actually
that
had,
felony conviction came up.
yes,
And what job did he hold in 2009 under the first conviction?
Honeywell Chemical Plant.
He was not
I
employed
left.
by school when the offense occurred.
Yes, sir. I left East
You didn't have
Ascension
a
High
teacher's
School.
degree and
Yes, sir.
He did, but the department does not become aware of the convictions
until he
until the
applies, until
individual.
he's not working as a teacher.
Correct.
Correct. I wasn't aware of it either until I was at Faraday High School as the offensive coordinator, and I was going to start a baseball team also. I wasn't aware of this either until, you do the fingerprint deal, and it comes back, and I'm like, oh my God. As I left East Ascension High School to go to Honeywell Chemical Plant as a maintenance supervisor, it was a step up in the ladder in the pay scale.
Ms. Bradford?
But,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, we normally don't allow certificates for people who are convicted of one felony. And just to make it,
We don't allow issuance of a certificate of people who have that felony conviction. But if an individual already has a certificate but is not employed, we're not always aware that the felony conviction
Right.
occurs after the certificate has been issued. So he had that a long time ago. that
normally we don't allow someone with a single felony conviction to
No,
teach.
sir.
And here we have someone with 2 felony convictions asking for a third chance, in essence.
He has 2 felony convictions, but he's never asked the board for the issuance before.
Thank
The
you.
reissuance.
Ms. Bradford?
Thank you, Ms. Duffy. My question
Yes, ma'am.
is, what is different about your life now? How have you been rehabilitated, if you will?
The rehabilitation process?
Yeah, I mean,
Mr.
what is
Judge?
different for you that,
A lot. Beating cancer, missing kids, knowing what I was putting in their hearts and their ability to achieve and get better, seeing them improve. I love all my kids, every one of them. I'm on this earth to be a teacher and then a coach. I miss it tremendously. It's my heart, it's my love, it's my passion, it's my goal. I should have never left.
thank you.
Mr. Gio?
Am I correct in saying that the challenge started from an accident, correct?
Yes, sir.
And prescribed drugs became an issue in the process?
That's correct,
Right.
yes, sir.
So how do you deal with that today? What is your temptation
One
to go
day at a
into today?
time.
I understand.
One day at a time.
How long have you been rehabilitated from that?
5 years.
5 years.
Yes. It's good. I'm good today. I'm happy. I'm blessed.
Thank you.
Mr. Romer?
So, I appreciate you being here today. I know
Thank
it's
you.
difficult circumstances.
Yes, sir.
The record reflects possession of some sort of narcotic, I suppose. I mean, was that your prescription?
That was mine, yes, sir. It was
Okay.
my prescription, yes, sir.
And what were those charges regarding those prescriptions?
Because they were in my excuse me, they were in my vehicle.
And you weren't supposed to have them?
Correct.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Correct.
I'm
Which
just
I wasn't.
trying to make sure I understood what I was seeing here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And you know, to be honest with you, they're going to try to get you with as many and how many charges they, you know.
Okay.
And I respect every police officer, every armed force person we have in this country. You know, we need them.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the case.
Are you, and I don't know this, I wouldn't ask this question if I knew the answer to.
Yes, sir.
To what, how are you regularly, or are you regularly somehow monitored for potential drug abuse again? Is that not part of your employment with the school system? I don't know.
Well, when I went through the rehabilitation process for probation and all, I was tested
Regularly?
Yeah, every week, every 3 or 4 days. So.
And that's not required of you any longer?
I'm sorry?
That's not required of you any longer?
No, sir.
Okay.
Because I completed everything and passed every one.
Okay.
That was part of the restitution process.
Madam Chairman, I'd like to call.
Now, with the cancer, I would probably light up the screen right now with the radiation that's in my body, but
Yes, sir.
I feel good today.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Pardon me?
Yes.
I'll second it. It takes 2/3. Yeah.
Mr. Lee wants to call the question. Mr. Romer second that motion, and so we'll have to take calling the question to a vote.
You can just ask if anyone's opposed, Ms.
Does anybody oppose calling the question? No one opposes calling the question. Okay, so we're going to vote on the motion. The motion put forward is to grant the certificate, and we have a second. I need to know if there's any opposition to that motion. Hearing none, motion carries. Congratulations, Mr. Chasson.
Bless y'all hearts. Thank you.
Go forth and do good.
Ms. Bofi,
Yes.
I'm sorry for being late, but there was an accident on the bridge,
Is that
but
Ms. Lottie?
I do want to speak to this issue and to all other future issues. I think it's a travesty that we have this process. This information is presented to us in our packets, and then it's like the person comes and they're on trial. I just think
No.
as a board, we need to come up with another process, and that's my 2 cents for today.
Thank you, Ms. Lottie. I appreciate the comment, but I also...
Mr. Chasson, I'm running this board meeting. I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
I have a
I
motion.
want to make a comment about.
Mr. Lee.
comment. I thought we had a policy that we would not discuss the particulars. Don't we have that policy?
The policy is that you can ask questions, but you're really not supposed to ask the nature of the offense. As he did plead guilty, and there's no question about that, you can ask to his rehabilitation, but not to the specific offenses themselves.
Right, that's what I thought.
I believe I have a motion from Ms. Orange Jones to adjourn. Is there a second to that motion? I have a second by Dr. Moranti. Educator Effectiveness Committee is adjourned. We'll have School Innovation and Turnaround at